How y'all doing? How y'all doing? This is Alvin on Trying Success on the Old Fashioned Health Network. Good health inside and out. Today on my Black History Show on Trying Success, I have an amazing guest. To me, he's one of my favorite historians that I found on TikTok. So I'm just going to call him Mr. Historian, and I'm going to let him tell you a little bit about himself and who he is and what he do. How you doing, man? Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I've been glad to be on. So my name is Anthony Kwamu. I'm an army officer. I love history. I do not consider myself a historian per se because I do not have a degree in history yet. It's something I'm looking towards getting in the future. Mm-hmm. But I love history, world history, Black history, all kinds of history, African history. And if it's history, I love it. Doesn't matter where it's from. I love it.
So I want to tell you one of the things that got me with you that made me say I have to get this man on my show. And it was something that I had heard about before, but there was a part that you did an interview on where you went back and did some research. And when you did the research, you found out your wife was in the presence of you telling her about, you was telling people about that there were actually Black people were actually enslaved by other Black people. And it was a research that you had done on this island. There was a remote island that really people don't know anything about. It was a real quiet. It was an island that just was discreet. And you talked about that island. And I was like, I got to get him on my show because listening to you tell that piece and how we were enslaved by some of our own, at the hands of some of our own people that had us enslaved or helped within slavery. So I want you to tell me a little bit about more history that you found, and specifically about that particular, if you can remember that video that you done. Do you remember the one I'm talking about?
Yes, absolutely. So going back, so I am from Cameroon originally, and this is a place I grew up in. This particular place is called Bimbia. It's a village not very far from where I grew up in. It's less than 1 hour away from where I grew up in. But in around 2007, surveyors were trying to look for a place to construct a hotel in the jungle, and they came across these ruins. No one had ever seen them before. No one knew anything about the ruins. They asked some of the locals in the area. They had no idea, but a few of the very elderly locals said, yes, this was indeed a slave station, was a slave trading center up to around the 1840s. So when they So researchers immediately in the local university started digging into it, and there were some researchers who came from the US too. They looked into it, and they discovered that, yes, this was actually a functional slave trading center. But the thing about it was that it was very remote. It was in a very remote area. Even getting there today is quite remote. But you can't get to it today. And the reason why it was remote, it was because the chiefs were willing participants in the slave trade there. They were actually not necessarily kidnapping their own people, maybe kidnapping people from other villages. It could have even involved some of their own people. Research is still ongoing. But it's one of those aspects in history that is a very touchy subject, about many Africans, taking part in the slave trade. Now, this is not to absolve anyone of any blame or anything. Now, a lot of the trade was going on with Europeans themselves being involved in it. If you look at places like nearby Calabar, and many other places in East Africa, the Europeans themselves sometimes carried out raids themselves, especially when it came to the Portuguese. There are places like all over the West African coast where villages were bombarded until they provided slaves. If they were not providing enough, sometimes they got seized themselves. So that was very common. But in the case in Bimbia, these were willing participants, unfortunately. And which often happens sometimes, unfortunately. But what got me about Bimbia is that this was very close to where I grew up, and none of us knew anything about it. And the reason why it was so secret is because a lot of the times the willing African chiefs who took part in that trade, they had to keep it secret from their people, because this was not okay with their people. There are many examples, especially in the Congo region, where people overthrew their chiefs when they found out that their chiefs were somehow complicit in the trade themselves. So Bimbia, when Bimbia was closed down in the 1840s, it remained hidden for about 200 years. So it took 200 years for people to even know that this place even existed.
Wow. When you was telling that piece, man, I was like, wow, this is not only the research that you do, But when you explaining the history that you find, you so detailed and you so considerate and courteous that you try to make sure that when you explain the history that you found, that you also tell the people this is not a reflection of this or whoever it is, that you're trying to make sure that you don't offend anybody when you do tell a history. And it's just so, I just like the way you tell your history. I like the way you do your research. Even if it's something that I've heard or seen before, you're real concerned about making sure I need you to understand why it happened and who it happened to, but this is not a reflection on anybody per se, you know, and you always do that. And I like the way you tell. I watch your stuff all the time when you talk about your history anyway. So that was one of my favorite ones, because you told a story about how it affected your wife when she was hearing you talked about that.
Yes, absolutely. So my wife, of course, she's Black American. So in 2016, I took her to Cameroon. So we visited Cameroon so she could see where I grew up. And we went to this place, to this Bimbia slave station. So that's the first time I had ever been there myself before. And when she stood there, you know, for me, it was a sad event just to look at. But for her, I saw that, you know, she took it differently. It was hard on her, you know. It was really hard on her. And so for her to feel that her own people, you know, possibly did this to her, right. You know, it was really hard. So, and I was standing there and I just, you know, I just felt extremely, you know, it was guilt, right. You know, and she recently did her DNA, and it came back the highest percentage, coincidentally, of where she may have originated from, according to her DNA, was coincidentally from Cameroon.
Wow.
You know. And the fact that I grew up in that area, in that same area, my family lived there, it is possible that my ancestors may have actually sold her ancestors into slavery. You know, it's a really hard, you know, feeling, you know. But that's where healing starts. You know, it's a very touchy subject for a lot of people. It's very deep for a lot of people. There are a lot of people who do not want to acknowledge that. There are those who acknowledge it, but still, healing has to start somewhere.
Yeah. How do you feel about the whole thing with the critical race theory? Well, put it to you like this. So not about how you feel about it, but the kind of history that you do, the research you do, means to me that we need to understand history. We need to understand how stuff happens and how it comes about and where it is, so you'll be educated. And like you said, healing starts at understanding and knowing. So I appreciate the way you do your research. But more or less, let's just get into this piece right here. Who is your favorite historian that makes you like history so much? You mentioned your brother. What makes you like history so much? What makes you want to be so passionate about it?
Oh, yes, I have a lot of people. So I do have my big brother. I have my father. He loved history. Then my grandfather. I used to watch a lot of history, but when I was about 12 years old, there was this incident where I had to go out and play with some friends of mine. My granddad was like, "Hey, come in here, come sit in here and watch this documentary with me." And it was a documentary called The Africans. It's done by Dr. Ali Mazrui. He's a very famous Ethiopian historian, and he did all this. He had a series of videos on African history, and that was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. You know, it took African, for me, that was the first time I saw African history that was beyond slavery or colonization. You see, if in Cameroon, if you grew up in Cameroon or parts of Africa, a lot of times the only history you learn about Africa is starting with colonization. Right. You come to America, history starts, or at least Black history starts with slavery. But that's absolutely not the case. There was a whole lot of history before all of that. So Dr. Ali Mazrui kind of broadened my mind with his documentaries on that. And then you also have Dr. Gates. Dr. Gates, you know, he does a lot of history beyond all of that. So he goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, to Ethiopia, Mali Empire, you know, a history before colonization or slavery or any of that. So those were some of my inspirations.
Okay. So now, you're saying you're not a history professor yet, but you're working toward that. Are you thinking about becoming a history professor?
Eventually, maybe. I have a career now. I'm an active duty full-time Army officer. So that gets, that's very, very busy. Keeps me very busy. Right. So eventually something I may look into, you know, whenever I get to leave the service.
Okay. So now history and archaeologists are, one is a study of bones and things like that. And then, of course, the history that you do is somewhat of the same. But would you be interested in something historic, like archaeology, bones, or anything does that excite you?
Absolutely. Funny you should ask that. When I was in university in Cameroon, before I came to US, that was actually what I was studying, archaeology. My parents did not like that. So before I came to the US, my dad said, I'm not sending you to America to go dig up bones of dead animals and dead people and all that. So it was basically, I had to give that up before coming to the US, or something that I was not going to get to America. But yes, that's absolutely something I was always interested in. It's something I may do in the future. It's not going to be as a professional archaeologist, of course. It's probably going to be as an amateur. There's a lot of history, especially where I grew up, that needs to be discovered. Lots of it everywhere. Yeah. Even here in Texas, while if I go to the Alamo all the time, they keep making new discoveries every single day.
So if you had a particular part of the country that you would like to just really start more of your history research, where would it be?
Oh, without a doubt, two places, Mali in the Timbuktu area and Ethiopia.
Okay.
Mali and Ethiopia.
Wow. Why those two?
There's a lot of, I'm very interested in African history because a lot of it has not been explored. Mali, the Mali Empire, I'm not sure how familiar your listeners are with it, but it was one of the largest empires in its day.
Right.
And there is a lot of history behind it that we just don't know. There are a lot of manuscripts from the city of Timbuktu. There are hundreds of thousands of them that have been discovered, that they were hidden for a long time for various reasons, but they've just been discovered. They're now coming up into the open. They are being preserved digitally and physically. They are building up museums for those. And they are so extensive that no one has really taken the time yet to study everything that's in those manuscripts. There's a lot of learning to be done there. There's progress being made, but there's just way too much knowledge in there to be done overnight.
Yeah, there's a young lady that does a lot of history on Mali, and just listening to some of the stuff that she tells, it would be quite interesting to watch and hear you go and do more in-depth research, because she tells a lot of stuff about Mali, and that I'm like, I didn't have any idea about that's relatable to the United States. And so, yeah, I would be really interested in seeing you do that kind of study. That would be great. So now, history for me, a lot of people think history is a boring thing. It's like, especially when you're in school, it's like, I just can't get, the history classes in school weren't one of my favorite until as I got a little older. So do you think that you developed this love for history because of your parents, or do you think your family, or because you just have always had it in you? Because of course you want to study archaeology. Do you think it's just inquisitive in you? Do you always want to do this?
I think it was my upbringing, what I was exposed to. You see, when I grew up in Cameroon in the 1980s, we did not have Disney, we did not have 24-hour TV or any of that. So we had what was available to us. And what was available to us a lot of times were textbooks, So I was still at home, and my brother at the time, I was a lot younger. My brother at the time was about 10, 12 years old. And the things they'll be talking about with their friends, 10-year-old kids, and what they discussed about, they'll be discussing about, hey, how good is Margaret Thatcher a politician as compared to Ronald Reagan? Because that's the only thing they knew. Those were the only magazine. You have Newsweek. Instead of having Disney books around, the only things that were around were Newsweek magazines, or sometimes textbooks. And they'll be asking themselves whether it was wise for Hitler to invade Poland in 1939, or various things like that. So So of course, when your big brother talks, you listen to your big brother. When you converse with your friends, you listen to them.
Right.
So it was just my upbringing as far as what was available to me. And of course, we only had one TV station at the time, and of course, on TV they only had about 15 minutes of cartoons every day. The rest of the time was world news or documentaries. So I grew up watching a lot of that. I kind of grew up. I kind of grew into that.
Okay, so. Do you think that as far as history is concerned now versus the history that the way we approach history now, and as opposed to the way it used to be, when do you think that history it's sought after more now than it used to be? Because to me, it seemed like people hadn't always been concerned about history, but now all of a sudden everybody's like concerned about history.
Yes, I think it is. It's quite exciting, actually. You see, I only started TikTok about 4 or 5 months ago, because a friend of mine got me into it. He'd been trying to for a while. I said, hey, get into history. Everybody is now doing history, and I know you like history, so get into it. So I did one video, people liked it, and then I did another and another, and so that's how it all started. Yeah, so definitely people are more and more into history. You see, I was a history teacher in Georgia before I got into the army, yes, in Douglas County. So I taught for 6 years. I taught history, geography, and economics in middle school, and literature for about 6 years. So I could see the interest students were developing in it. And, some may have found it boring, but I had a lot of my students who said, wow, you make history interesting, Mr. Kwamu, and I think social media has done that a lot nowadays, because you have a lot of creative people on social media who are taking very mundane historical topics, bringing it to social media, putting their personalities into it, and making it extremely interesting for people.
Yeah, that's what I was just intrigued by yours. It's just like the images and stuff you come up with, and the places. Like, wow, it's like you almost just take people to the place when you're talking about it. It's like you're really good at that, man. I hope you continue to go with it.
Thank you.
I would be interested in you getting into a little archaeology, although, possibly I think that's a good thing, but you're really good at the whole history research, so I hope you get a little bit of that in there.
Thank you.
So let me ask you this. Do you believe, as far as history is concerned, how old do you think history actually really goes back? Everybody go back to BC and all that kind of stuff. How far do you think it's older than what we even actually know about history?
Whoa, that's way beyond my pay scale. I mean, if you go back, from what the scientists tell us, I can only tell you about what I read, and what the scientists tell us, Earth is about 4 billion years old.
Right.
According to scientists, humans have only been around for about 400,000 years.
Right.
Starting with Neanderthals, early men, and Homo sapiens, and all that.
Right.
But as far as written history is concerned, I'm thinking about 10,000 years back with the Sumerians, and maybe a little bit later after that with the Egyptians and everything. Right. But of course, if you're talking of written history, yes, it only goes back as far as we know. As far as history with humans, I guess I'll be from creation, when humans came around. If it's just history, because history doesn't always have to involve humans.
Exactly.
Studying dinosaurs and ancient animals and plants is a form of history. So I suppose I'll go all the way back to creation.
Do you collect?
But there's always a lot left to be discovered. Every day, new things are being discovered, with new scientific techniques and archaeological techniques.
Now, do you collect any type of historical artifacts or anything? Or do you collect paintings or anything like that?
I collect a few. I have a few artifacts, especially when it comes to military history. I really, really enjoy military history. Especially, I have a thing for states that do not exist yet, or countries that used to exist but no longer exist for whatever. I have some from Katanga province, some coins from there. That was a small state in Congo that existed in the 1960s after a war was developed, from Biafra, from South Vietnam. South Vietnam is one I've actually visited there once. One of my favorite topics in history, the whole Vietnam War. I have from Indochina. I'm looking at collecting some items. A student gave me a bullet from the Confederacy as well. One of my students back in the day, a Confederate bullet, for states that used to exist but no longer exist. So I try to collect as much as I can. Have some ancient original photos from Cameroon in the 1920s. The collecting sometimes can be pricey. You can see something you really like, but your bank account will not really like it.
So this is my last question I asked you about. How do you think history and religion intersect? Do you think they intersect at all, or what's your thoughts about that?
Yes, absolutely. You cannot do history without religion. History is shaped a lot by religion. Actually, in my opinion, history is shaped by warfare and conflict, and majority of conflict in human history has to do with religion of some sort, for the most part. absolutely. So history and religion, they kind of go hand in hand. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. It's just what it is.
Just what it is.
You know?
Okay. Man, thank you so very much. Is there anything else you would like to share with us this for this Black History Month? Is there anything you would like to just leave us with before we end this?
Yes. I'll just say history, this is for anyone who's listening in America and anyone who's listening in Africa. And history goes beyond just, for Black history goes beyond just slavery and colonization. History started way before that, I actually just wrote, I'm not sure if I can talk about that, a book I just wrote.
Yeah.
If it's okay.
Hey, man, if you read a book, I definitely need to know about this book. Please tell us about the book you wrote, how we can get it.
Okay. I just got published it. It's called The Red Monk of Roher.
Okay.
It's actually set in, I'm actually releasing a TikTok on it on Friday. It's set in Ethiopia in the 13th century, in medieval Ethiopia. And it's just about a monk who, he's a monk by day, but at night he's an avenging monk. It's a revenge story. It's set in the 13th century in Ethiopia. Now, you may hear Ethiopia and say, oh, wow, that's weird. Why Ethiopia? But it's one of those things in history that I say we don't know a lot about our history. We keep looking at our history, only starting with the 1400s or 1500s, with colonization and stuff. Our history goes beyond that. Take Ethiopia, for example. If I tell you that Ethiopia was among the first countries on the planet to adopt Christianity as a religion, some historians say it was actually the first to make it an official religion. Well, that's up for debate, but it definitely adopted it in the 4th century AD. If I tell you that, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lord of the Rings. If I tell you that part of Lord of the Rings is based on Ethiopian history, just a part, not all. There are parts of Lord of the Rings based on Ethiopian history. Absolutely. Or if I tell you that coffee was just brewed and grown and exported out of Ethiopia. Ethiopia is what gave the world coffee.
And the best coffee, actually. I did see that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you've ever heard of the largest underground churches in the world? Mm-hmm. These are called the Lalibella Churches. Okay. They were built about 800-900 years ago. They are in Ethiopia. And so Ethiopia has a very, very rich history. And to top it off, Ethiopia is among the 10 oldest countries on the planet. So they've had a civilization going back to about 1000 BC.
Wow. And they're not colonized, are they?
It was the only country in Africa never to be colonized.
I thought so.
Because, they are civilized. I'm not sure if you have to do a civilization, but they were able to actually fight. Italy tried to colonize Ethiopia, but they actually defeated Italy in several battles. In the end, Italy just gave up, and no other country found it worth its while to worry about Ethiopia.
Wow. Do you have like a social media page or something where we can find your book, or how can they find out about this book?
Yes, you can go to redmonkbook.com.
Okay.
Red Monk.
Is it
redmonkbook.com?
REDD or RE? How's it spelled?
RED, like the color red.
Okay.
Because the title of the book is The Red Monk of Roher.
Can you hold the book up? You got the book there with you?
Yes. Give me 1 second.
Okay. I want to see.
I'll get it. Yeah. Okay, I'm not. Yep.
We can see it perfectly well. Wow.
And it is inspired by actual events.
So this book is going to end up being on television. They're going to make a television show. I can already tell.
We'll see.
So he's a monk by day and a revenge at night.
And avenging, yes, absolutely. So basically, by day he's bringing salvation with the Bible, but by night he's exacting vengeance with the sword.
Wow.
And there is a whole story behind that. It's a little bit of vigilante justice, but he's trying to protect those he's come to care for. Practically, he was a soldier. Betrayed, left for dead. In order to survive, he escaped, became a monk, but then old enemies resurface and start threatening those he's come to care for. And the only way he can protect those people he's come to care for is to pick up the sword at night and try to do some justice.
So listen, I'm going to order that book. Can I order it on Amazon as well, or order it on your website, right?
It's on Amazon. That link will take you to Amazon. You can type it on Amazon, and you can just type in the Red Monk of Roher book, and it'll take you to it. It's also available as an audio book, ebook, paperback.
Okay, so here's the deal. I'm gonna order the book and I'm gonna read it, and then I'm gonna get. I want to interview you again specifically on this book. Okay.
Okay, absolutely.
Man, thank you so very much. I really, really appreciate it, and keep doing what you're doing, because I personally watch all your history stuff.
Oh, thank you.
A lot of my history, so keep doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being on the show.
I appreciate it, Alvin. Thank you. Anytime. And I love your show. I'm going to continue looking into it. I started looking somewhere into it, but, thank you. Keep doing what you're doing, sir.
I will, man. Thanks. Have a good one.
Absolutely.
Bye.